Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? Imagine watching another woman walk through your front door, wearing your favorite color, holding your husband's hand, and laughing at your expense while your mother-in-law pours her a drink. That was Sarah's life. For 3 years, she was the silent wife, the doormat, the punching bag for the wealthy, sterling family. But at the annual Christmas gala, when the mistress finally pushed her too far, it wasn't Sarah who snapped. It was the one person nobody expected. And when the truth came out about who really signed the checks, the silence was louder than a scream. You are not going to believe who actually owned the mansion. The chandelier in the foyer of the Sterling estate, a sprawling Georgian-style mansion in the heart of Newport, Rhode Island, hadn't been dusted properly in months. At least that's what Beatrice Sterling had said 3 times that morning. Sarah Jenkins stood on the ladder, a microfiber cloth in hand, carefully wiping the crystal teardrops. Her back ached. She had been up since 4:00 a.m. coordinating with the caterers, the florists, and the valet service for the Sterling annual winter gala. It was the biggest event of the social season, the night when the Sterling family reasserted their dominance over the local elite. "Mr. Spot, Sarah," a sharp voice echoed from below. Sarah froze her grip, tightening on the ladder. She didn't need to look down to know it was Beatrice, her mother-in-law. Beatrice was a woman who wore pearls like armor and viewed kindness as a character flaw. "I'm getting it now, Beatrice," Sarah said, her voice steady. She had learned long ago that fighting back only exhausted her. "And do hurry up," Beatrice snapped, checking her Cartier watch. "James is arriving from the city any minute. He's bringing a guest. I want the house to be perfect. We can't have you looking like that when they arrive." Sarah climbed down, wiping her hands on her jeans. "A guest? James didn't mention a guest." Beatrice offered a tight, pitying smile. "Well, James has a very busy life, Sarah. He can't be expected to update you on every minor detail. Just try to look presentable. Wear something that doesn't look like it came from a discount bin for once." Sarah watched her mother-in-law click-clack away across the marble floor. She sighed, pushing a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. She was the wife of James Sterling, the heir to the Sterling shipping fortune, yet she was treated like hired help. When they met 5 years ago, James had been charming, seemingly different from his snobbish family. But as the family business struggled and the pressure mounted, he had retreated into his mother's shadow, leaving Sarah to fend for herself in a house that despised her. The front heavy oak doors groaned open. Sarah smoothed her shirt, preparing to greet her husband. "James, you're early. I was just—" The words died in her throat. James walked in, looking dashing in his bespoke charcoal overcoat. But he wasn't alone. Hanging onto his arm, wrapped in a white fox fur coat that looked worth more than Sarah's car, was Chloe Vane. Chloe was everything Sarah wasn't. Blonde, loud, aggressively glamorous, and the daughter of a tech mogul. She was also James's business partner, a term Sarah had learned to loathe. "Sarah." James said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. "You're here. Great. You remember Chloe?" Chloe stepped forward, the heels of her Louboutins striking the floor with authority. She looked Sarah up and down, her lips curling into a smirk. "Oh, Sarah. Still doing the cleaning yourself? That is so quaint. I keep telling James he needs to hire proper staff so you don't have to ruin your hands." Chloe reached out and took Sarah's hand, inspecting it with mock sympathy, before dropping it as if it were dirty. "Hello, Chloe," Sarah said. pulling her hand back. "I didn't know you were coming to the family gala. It's usually family only." "Nonsense!" Beatrice's voice boomed as she re-entered the room, her arms wide open. She bypassed Sarah entirely and embraced Chloe. "Chloe, darling, you made it. The house feels brighter already." "Beatrice, you look stunning," Chloe squealed, kissing the older woman on both cheeks. "I brought that vintage Bordeaux you love. James said Sarah usually handles the wine, but I thought, why risk it? Let's bring the good stuff." James shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Sarah's gaze. "Chloe is going to help us host tonight, Sarah. She knows the investors coming from New York better than you do. It's just business." "Business," Sarah repeated, looking at her husband. "Is that why she's staying in the East Wing guest room? I saw the maids prepping it." "Actually," Chloe interjected, slipping her arm back through James's, "the East Wing is a bit drafty. Beatrice suggested I take the master suite down the hall. It's closer to the action." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The master suite down the hall was next to hers and James's bedroom. It was usually reserved for visiting royalty or heads of state, not business partners. "James?" Sarah asked quietly. James sighed, looking annoyed that he had to explain himself. "Sarah, don't make a scene. Chloe is doing us a huge favor. The company is in a fragile state. We need her father's investment. If she wants a comfortable room, she gets a comfortable room. Just go get changed. The caterers need direction." Beatrice ushered James and Chloe toward the drawing room, laughing at a joke Chloe whispered. "Come, darling, let's leave Sarah to her chores. We have real matters to discuss." Sarah stood alone in the foyer, the smell of Chloe's overpowering Chanel perfume lingering in the air. She looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked tired, worn down. But there was something else in her eyes today, a spark that hadn't been there yesterday. She touched the necklace hidden beneath her shirt, a simple silver locket. It was the only thing she had kept from her own grandmother. "Just business," Sarah whispered to the empty room. "Okay, James, if you want to talk business, we can talk business." She turned and walked toward the kitchen, not to check on the caterers, but to make a phone call. A call she had promised herself she would never make. By 7:01 p.m., the Sterling Manor was transformed. The dim lights of the chandeliers cast a golden glow over the mahogany furniture, and the air hummed with the soft sound of a string quartet. The cream of Newport society had arrived: senators, hedge fund managers, and old money matriarchs. Sarah had dressed in a simple navy blue velvet gown. It was elegant but understated, bought off the rack 2 years ago. She wore her hair in a neat chignon, her makeup minimal. She knew her role blend in smile, make sure the glasses were full, and don't speak unless spoken to. She stood near the entrance to the ballroom, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres that a flustered waiter had shoved into her hands. Across the room, Chloe Vane was holding court. Chloe was wearing a dress that could only be described as a weapon, a shimmering, backless crimson gown that plunged dangerously low. It screamed for attention. She stood in the center of a circle of men, including James and several key investors, laughing loudly and touching James's arm every few seconds. Beatrice stood nearby, beaming like a proud mother introducing Chloe to people as James's brilliant associate. Sarah watched as a woman she knew, Mrs. Higgins, leaned into Beatrice. "And where is Sarah tonight?" Beatrice waved her hand dismissively, though Sarah was standing only 20 feet away. "Oh, you know Sarah. She's terribly shy. Not really cut out for this high-octane world. We try to protect her from the stress." Sarah tightened her grip on the silver tray. protect me. She walked forward, intending to put the tray down on a side table when she felt a hand on her elbow. She turned to see Arthur Sterling, her father-in-law. Arthur was a man of few words. He was 70, with steel-grey hair and a face etched with the stress of keeping the family legacy afloat. Unlike Beatrice and James, Arthur had never been cruel to Sarah. He had been distant, yes, but observant. He spent most of his time in the library, staring at ledgers that Sarah knew were bleeding red ink. "Sarah," Arthur said, his voice gravelly, "you look dignified." "Thank you, Arthur," she said, surprised. "Can I get you a drink?" "No," he said, glancing across the room at his wife and son, fawning over Chloe. His eyes narrowed. "I see the circus is in town." Sarah let out a short, dry laugh. "James says it's necessary for the business." Arthur grunted. "James says a lot of things. He listens to his mother too much. He mistakes glitter for gold." He looked at Sarah, his eyes piercing. "You've been handling the household accounts this past year. Haven't you, Beatrice? Thinks the accountant does it. But I see your handwriting on the ledgers." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't realized he knew. I just wanted to help. The expenses were getting out of hand." "You cut the floral budget by 40% and negotiated a better rate with the caterers," Arthur noted. "Smart, practical." Before Sarah could respond, a high-pitched voice sliced through the conversation. "There she is, the lady of the hour. Or should I say the lady of the background?" Chloe swayed over to them, a large glass of red wine in her hand. She was already slightly tipsy. James trailed behind her, looking apologetic but saying nothing. "Hello, Arthur," Chloe purred, kissing the old man on the cheek. Arthur stood stiffly, not returning the embrace. "And Sarah, cute dress. Is it vintage or just old?" Several guests nearby chuckled. Beatrice appeared, looking delighted at Sarah's discomfort. "Chloe, darling, be nice," Beatrice said, though her tone suggested the opposite. "Sarah does her best with the allowance we give her." Sarah felt the heat rise in her cheeks. The allowance James gave her was barely enough for groceries. She paid for her own clothes using money she had saved from her life before James' money they knew nothing about. "I'm actually quite fond of this dress," Sarah said, her voice clear. "It's classic. Not everything needs to shout to be heard." The small crowd went silent. It was a rare pushback from Sarah. Chloe's eyes flashed. She didn't like being challenged. She took a step closer, her smile turning predatory. "Classic," Chloe mocked. "That's a nice word for pulling. You know, James and I were just talking about redecorating the manor. It's all a bit dusty, like this dress. We were thinking of something modern, brighter." She gestured wildly with her wine glass. "Chloe, watch the wine," James warned weakly. "Oh, relax, Jamie," she giggled. She turned back to Sarah, stepping aggressively into her personal space. "I think this house needs a mistress who knows how to shine. Don't you agree, Sarah? I think this house needs stability, hot on or show," Sarah replied, holding her ground. Chloe's expression darkened. "Oops," she said flatly. With a flick of her wrist that was too deliberate to be an accident, Chloe tipped her glass. A wave of dark crimson Cabernet splashed across the front of Sarah's navy velvet dress. It soaked in instantly, ruining the fabric, dripping down onto her shoes. The room gasped. "Oh my God!" Chloe shrieked, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "I'm so clumsy, Sarah. I'm so sorry, but honestly, you shouldn't have been standing so close. You really are always in the way, aren't you?" Sarah stood frozen, the cold wine seeping through to her skin. She looked at James. Defend me, she thought. Just once defend me. James looked at Sarah, then at the wet stain, then at Chloe. He rubbed the back of his neck. Sarah, maybe you should go upstairs and change. It's making a scene. Making a scene? Sarah repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She threw wine on me, James. It was an accident, Beatrice hissed, stepping in front of her son. Don't be dramatic, Sarah. Go change, or better yet, stay upstairs. We can't have you smelling like a winery while we greet the senator. Beatrice turned to Chloe, cooing, Oh, my poor dear. Did you spill any on your beautiful gown? Let's get you a fresh glass. The humiliation was total. The guests were whispering eyes, darting between the defeated wife and the triumphant mistress. Sarah looked at the three of them, her spineless husband, her cruel mother-in-law, and the woman trying to steal her life. Then she looked at Arthur. The old man was shaking with rage. His fists were clenched at his sides. He started to step forward to say something, but Sarah caught his eye. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Not yet, her eyes said. Sarah took a deep breath. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She reached for a napkin from a passing waiter, dabbed the worst of the wine, and straightened her spine. You're right, Beatrice, Sarah said, her voice projecting across the silent circle. I should change. I have a very important announcement to make at dinner, and I'd hate to do it in a stained dress. She turned and walked away, her head held high. Announcement? Chloe laughed nervously as Sarah departed. What's she going to announce, that she found a new recipe for pot roast? The crowd laughed, but the tension in the room had shifted. Upstairs inside the master bedroom, Sarah didn't reach for another dress. She reached for her phone. She dialed a number she had memorized years ago. This is Sarah, she said when the line connected. It's time. Execute the clause. Tonight. She hung up and walked to the closet. She pushed aside the modest clothes James liked her to wear. From the very back inside a garment bag she hadn't opened in 5 years, she pulled out a dress. It was black silk, sharp, expensive, dangerous. It was the kind of dress a woman wore when she was done being a victim. Downstairs, the dinner bell rang. The dining room of the Sterling Manor was a masterpiece of intimidation. A 40-foot mahogany table stretched beneath a frescoed ceiling, set with silver cutlery that dated back to the Victorian era. 20 guests were seated, the low murmur of conversation punctuated by the clinking of crystal glasses. At the center of the table, James sat nervously. To his right in the seat, traditionally reserved for the wife of the heir, sat Chloe. She was beaming, basking in the attention, whispering loudly to the senator on her other side about her vision for the Sterling legacy. Beatrice sat at the far end, opposite Arthur, surveying her kingdom. She noticed Sarah's empty chair, a folding chair the staff had squeezed in near the kitchen door, far away from the important guests. Beatrice smirked. It was a petty arrangement, designed to remind Sarah of her place. James, Beatrice called out, her voice cutting through the chatter. Perhaps we should start the first course. It seems Sarah has decided to sulk in her room. We can't let the soup get cold waiting for a temper tantrum to subside. James nodded, signaling the staff. Yes, Mother. Sarah is feeling unwell, I suppose. Actually, a voice rang out from the archway. I've never felt better. The room went silent. All heads turned toward the entrance. Sarah stood there. The navy velvet was gone. In its place, she wore a floor-length gown of black liquid silk. It was structured and sharp with a high neckline, but a back that plunged daringly low. It fit her like a second skin, showcasing a figure that the baggy sweaters and old jeans had hidden for years. She wore no jewelry except for her grandmother's silver locket, and her hair was no longer in a messy bun, but cascaded in loose, glossy waves over one shoulder. She didn't look like the tired housewife who cleaned the chandeliers. She looked like a queen coming to claim a debt. James's jaw dropped. He had never seen his wife look like this, not even on their wedding day. Chloe's eyes narrowed into slits. She set her wineglass down hard. Sarah walked into the room. She didn't walk with the hurried, apologetic shuffle she usually used. She glided. The click of her heels was rhythmic, deliberate. She walked past the folding chair near the kitchen. She didn't even look at it. She continued down the length of the table. "Sarah," Beatrice snapped, recovering from her shock. "You're late, and that dress, isn't it a bit severe for a holiday gala?" "Morning attire, Beatrice," Sarah said, her voice smooth and cool. "I thought it appropriate. We are burying old habits tonight." She reached the top of the table where James and Chloe sat. Chloe looked up, a smug grin plastering her face. "Sorry, sweetie," Chloe said, patting the arm of the chair. "I took your seat. James wanted me close by to help with the business talk. There's a folding chair back there for you." Sarah looked down at Chloe. The silence stretched for an uncomfortable 5 seconds. Sarah didn't get angry. She didn't beg. She simply smiled, a terrifying smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You can keep the seat, Chloe," Sarah said softly, loud enough for the table to hear. "It's a seat for a dependent. I prefer to sit somewhere with a bit more authority." Sarah turned and walked to the very center of the room, directly across from the senator. She motioned to a waiter. "Bring a chair. Here." The waiter, a young man who had seen Sarah scrubbing floors that morning, hesitated. He looked at Beatrice. "Do it." Arthur's voice rumbled from the end of the table. It was the first time he had spoken. The waiter scrambled, bringing a heavy oak chair. Sarah sat. She was now physically positioned as the equal to the senator, blocking Beatrice's view of the center of the table. "So," Sarah said, picking up her linen napkin and unfolding it with precision. "Senator, you were asking about the sterling shipping routes in the Pacific?" The senator, a heavy-set man named Thomas Reed, blinked. Yes, I was just telling James that the tariffs are becoming a problem." "They are only a problem if you're still routing through the standard commercial lanes," Sarah said effortlessly. "If you utilize the free trade subsidiary loopholes in the Singapore Agreement, specifically Clause 14B, you can bypass the tariff entirely. It cuts overhead by 12%. The table went dead quiet. James stared at her. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "You don't know anything about the shipping routes." "Don't I?" Sarah took a sip of water. "I balanced the logistics budget last month, James. While you were in the Hamptons with Chloe scouting locations, I was reading the maritime trade laws to figure out why we were losing $2 million a quarter." Beatrice scoffed, her face turning pink. "Nonsense. She's parroting something she heard on the news. James, get to control of your wife." "Actually," the senator interjected, leaning forward, looking at Sarah with new interest. "She's right. Clause 14B. My aides briefed me on that last week. It's a brilliant workaround. I didn't think sterling shipping was nimble enough to use it." "We are now," Sarah said, locking eyes with James. Chloe felt the attention shifting and panicked. She wasn't used to being ignored. She leaned forward, her chest pressing against the table. "Well, logistics are boring," Chloe declared loudly. "The real excitement is the merger. My father is going to inject $5 million into sterling shipping next week. We're going to rebrand, make it sexy, Tech forward. 5 million, Sarah repeated flatly. That's generous. It's necessary, Chloe sneered, to save the sinking ship you've been living on. And where is your father getting this 5 million, Chloe? Sarah asked, tilting her head. Is it from Vane Technologies? Because I read in the Financial Times this morning that Vane Tech halted trading on the Nasdaq due to an internal audit regarding embezzlement. The color drained from Chloe's face. That's fake news. Just a misunderstanding. Is it? Sarah reached into her small clutch and pulled out her phone. She didn't look at it, just set it on the table. Because I have a friend at the SEC. He says the assets are frozen, all of them, including your personal trust fund. You lie, Chloe shrieked, standing up. James, tell her she's lying. James looked at Chloe, panic rising in his chest. Chloe, is it true? We accepted the bridge loan based on your collateral. It's fine. It's just a glitch, Chloe yelled, her voice losing its seductive purr and becoming shrill. Sit down, child, Arthur grumbled from the end of the table. You're making a scene. Sarah picked up her spoon. Please, Chloe, sit. The soup is excellent. It's a recipe I gave the chef. It's called Revenge. Best served cold, though we're having it hot tonight. The soup course passed in a suffocating tension. The clinking of spoons against bowls sounded like swords clashing. James was sweating profusely. He kept checking his phone under the table, frantically texting his CFO. Beatrice was fuming. She glared at Sarah with enough hatred to burn down the mansion. She couldn't understand what was happening. Sarah was the mouse, the doormat. Since when did the doormat know about SEC regulations? Sarah, Beatrice hissed as the plates were cleared. I don't know what game you are playing trying to embarrass James in front of the investors, but it ends now. You will leave this table. I don't think I will, Sarah said calmly. This is my house, Beatrice spat, and I say you leave. Is it? Sarah asked. She turned her gaze to Arthur. Arthur, is this Beatrice's house? Arthur wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked at his wife of 40 years, then at his son, and finally at Sarah. His eyes twinkled with a strange, dark amusement. Technically, Arthur said slowly, the deed is in the family trust. Exactly, Beatrice triumphed. The Sterling family trust which James controls. James controls the operations, Sarah corrected. But the assets, the mansion, the land, the offshore accounts. She shook her head. James, Sarah said, turning to her husband, why don't you try to buy everyone a round of that vintage champagne Chloe loves so much? Put it on the corporate black card. I don't need to prove anything to you, James stammered. Do it, the senator urged, sensing blood in the water. I wouldn't mind a glass of Dom. Celebration of the merger, right? James forced a smile. Of course, garçon. Bring the Dom Perignon, the 1998. Put it on the Amex. The head waiter, a man named Henri, who had been with the family for decades, stepped forward. He looked pained. He walked over to James and whispered in his ear. Sir, I cannot. What do you mean you cannot? James hissed. Just swipe the card. I did, sir, before dinner. For the wine Miss Vane ordered. Henri whispered, though the silence in the room made his words audible to everyone. It was declined. Declined? James laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. It's an unlimited black card. Run it again. We ran it 3 times, sir. Code 404. Account frozen by administrator. James froze. Administrator, I am the administrator. Apparently not, Sarah said, taking a sip of her water. Chloe scoffed. Oh, please. It's probably just a fraud alert because we're spending so much. My card does that all the time. She pulled out her own platinum card. Here, use mine. I'll treat you all. Henri took Chloe's card. He didn't even walk to the machine. He just looked at it and handed it back. I'm sorry, Miss Vane. The system automatically rejects cards associated with Vane Technologies as of 5:00 p.m. today. Bank orders. Chloe snatched the card back, her hands trembling. This is absurd. I am going to sue this catering company. It's not the caterer, Chloe, Sarah said. It's the bank. And the reason James's card is declined is that the Sterling Family Trust has a moral turpitude clause. A what? James asked, his voice cracking. A moral turpitude clause, Sarah explained, acting as if she were teaching a kindergarten class. It states that if the acting CEO engages in behavior that jeopardizes the reputation of the family, say by parading a mistress around the family estate and using company funds to buy her furs while the company stock is plummeting, the primary beneficiary has the right to freeze all assets immediately. Primary beneficiary. Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. Arthur is the primary beneficiary, and he hasn't frozen anything. All eyes turned to Arthur. The old man took a slow sip of his wine. He looked at James' disappointment etched into every line of his face. I didn't freeze it, Beatrice. Then who did? James shouted. There's no one else. It's just us. Sarah stood up slowly. The black silk dress flowed around her like beau cric. She walked over to the sideboard, where her old, battered purse was sitting. She pulled out a thick document bound in blue leather. She tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud among the crystal glasses. You really should have read the prenuptial agreement more carefully, James, Sarah said. And the trust restructuring documents you signed 3 years ago. The ones you didn't even read because you were too busy rushing off to a golf weekend with Chloe. James reached for the document. His hands shook as he opened it. Page 42. Sarah directed. Paragraph 3. James scanned the page. His face went grey. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes wide with horror. This says... Read it out loud, Sarah commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of a gavel striking a sound block. James swallowed hard. In the event of mental incapacitation or voluntary negligence by the heir, control of the Sterling Trust reverts to the court-appointed guardian of the estate. And who is the guardian, James? Sarah asked. It says... James squinted, reading the fine print he had blindly signed years ago, thinking it was just tax paperwork. It says the guardian is Sarah Jenkins Sterling. The room erupted. What? Beatrice shrieked, jumping to her feet. You are the guardian. That's impossible. You're a nobody, a penniless orphan from Ohio. A nobody with a degree in forensic accounting, Sarah corrected sharply. A nobody who spent the last 5 years fixing your tax audits so you didn't go to prison, Beatrice. Arthur knew. He's the one who appointed me. Beatrice spun around to her husband. Arthur, tell me this is a joke. Arthur looked at his wife. It's no joke, Bea. James was running the company into the ground. He was spending millions on her. He pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. I needed someone I could trust to watch the books. Sarah was the only one in this house who wasn't trying to rob me. So, James slumped in his chair. You froze my accounts. I froze the company accounts, Sarah said, because as of tonight, I am initiating a hostile takeover of the Sterling management due to gross incompetence and embezzlement of funds for personal affairs. She looked at Chloe. And as for you, Chloe, since the house is technically owned by the trust, and the trust is currently under my administration. Sarah checked her watch. You are trespassing. Chloe laughed, a desperate, high-pitched sound. You can't kick me out. I'm a guest of the family. The family has no money, Chloe, Sarah said coldly. James's cards are dead. His car is leased under the company name. I cancelled the lease an hour ago. The tow truck is already at the gate. And this house... Sarah looked around the grand dining room. This house requires a lot of upkeep. Upkeep that James can no longer pay for. You can't do this, James yelled, standing up. I am your husband. Husband, Sarah raised an eyebrow. A husband protects his wife. A husband doesn't let his mistress pour wine on her. A husband doesn't treat her like a maid. She walked over to James, standing toe-to-toe with him. You wanted a trophy wife, James. You wanted someone to look pretty and stay quiet. Well, you got the quiet part wrong. I've been quiet for 3 years. I was listening, I was learning, and I was documenting. She pulled a USB drive from her clutch and dropped it into the senator's hand. Senator, that drive contains the proof of the tariff violations James authorized to fund Chloe's lifestyle. I suggest you distance yourself before the indictments come down on Monday. The senator stood up immediately. I have to go. Me too, another investor said. Wait, James pleaded, grabbing the senator's arm. Please, it's a misunderstanding. But the guests were already moving toward the door. The dinner was over. The gala was ruined. But the night wasn't. You ruined everything, Chloe screamed, grabbing a steak knife from the table. She lunged toward Sarah. Chloe, no! James shouted. But before Chloe could take 2 steps, the heavy dining room doors banged open. 2 men in dark suits walked in. Behind them was a woman in a sharp grey pantsuit. Mrs. Sterling, the woman asked, looking at Sarah. Yes, Sarah said calmly. I'm Detective Miller, the woman said. We received your tip regarding the Vane technology wire fraud, and we have a warrant for the arrest of Miss Chloe Vane. Chloe dropped the knife. It clattered onto the marble floor, echoing the collapse of her entire world. Beatrice collapsed into her chair, gasping for air. James stood frozen, watching the police walk toward his mistress. Sarah picked up her glass of water, toasted the empty room, and took a sip. Like I said, she whispered to herself, the soup is best served cold. The dining room, once a sanctuary of old money and polite whispers, had descended into chaos. The string quartet had long since fled, packing their cellos and violins the moment the handcuffs came out. Chloe Vane was not going quietly. Do you know who my father is? Chloe screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings as Detective Miller and her partner, a burly officer named Officer Kowalski, gripped her arms. The back of her red dress was wrinkled, her perfect hair now a disheveled mess. He will buy your entire precinct. He will have your badges. Your father is currently answering questions at the district attorney's office, Miss Vane. Detective Miller said, her tone unimpressed. The SEC raid on Vane Technologies happened simultaneously with our arrival here. Turns out that merger money was actually siphoned from pension funds. We call that a Ponzi scheme. James, Chloe shrieked, twisting her body to look at him. She looked desperate, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Do something. You promised you'd take care of me. You said you were the king of Newport. James Sterling stood by the fireplace, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked at the woman he had risked his marriage for, a woman now revealed to be a fraud, screaming like a banshee. And then he looked at Sarah. Sarah sat calmly at the head of the table, finishing her water. She looked untouchable. I can't do anything, Chloe," James muttered, his voice weak. He took a step back, physically distancing himself from his mistress. If you broke the law, that has nothing to do with me. I was just an investor. I didn't know." Chloe stopped struggling. She stared at James, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You coward," she hissed. "You spineless little leech. You were happy to spend the money when I was buying you Rolexes. You were happy to sign those fraudulent loan applications." "That's enough," Detective Miller said, yanking Chloe toward the door. "You have the right to remain silent, Miss Vane. I suggest you start using it." As they dragged Chloe out of the room, her heels scraping against the marble floor, she locked eyes with Sarah one last time. "You planned this," Chloe screamed, spitting the words. "You witch!" "You knew all along." Sarah didn't shout back. She didn't smile. She simply raised 2 fingers in a small, dismissive wave. "Goodbye, Chloe." The heavy oak doors slammed shut, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Beatrice Sterling, who had been clutching her pearls so tightly, her knuckles were white, finally exhaled. She looked around the ruined dinner party, the half-eaten food, the overturned chair, the stain of red wine on the carpet. She turned her fury on the only target she felt she could still bully. "Well," Beatrice huffed, smoothing her skirt. "That was unfortunate, but clearly it was all Chloe's fault. She duped us. Poor James." She walked over to her son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "My poor boy, you were a victim of a predator." James nodded eagerly, grasping at the lifeline. "Yes, exactly. She manipulated me." "Sarah." He turned to his wife, putting on his best puppy dog face. "Sarah, you saw that. She was crazy. I didn't know about the fraud, I swear." Sarah stood up. She picked up the blue leather document, the trust agreement, and tapped it against her palm. "You signed the loan applications, James," Sarah said quietly. "Chloe just admitted it. That makes you an accessory to wire fraud." James's face fell. But I can testify against her. I can cut a deal." "You might want to focus less on the police right now," Sarah said, "and more on your immediate living situation." Beatrice stepped forward, her chin raised. "Sarah, stop this charade. You've had your fun. You embarrassed the girl, you scared the investors. Bravo, now hand over the trust documents to Arthur and go to your room. We have damage control to do in the morning." Sarah looked at her mother-in-law with genuine curiosity. "You still don't get it, do you, Beatrice?" "Get what?" Beatrice snapped. "You are the guardian of the trust." "Fine. We will petition the court to have you removed on grounds of emotional instability. No judge will let a vindictive housewife control the Sterling fortune." "The Sterling fortune?" Sarah laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Beatrice, there is no fortune. The accounts are empty. James drained the liquid assets months ago. The stocks are leveraged. The only thing this family has left is debt." "Liar," Beatrice shrieked. "We have assets. We have the artwork, the cars, the summer home in the Hamptons. Sold, leased, and foreclosed." Sarah listed them off. "I saw the notices. I tried to warn James, but he was too busy networking with Chloe." "We have this house," Beatrice yelled, stomping her foot on the floor. "The Sterling Manor. It's been in our family for 4 generations. It's worth $20 million. We can mortgage it." Sarah looked at Arthur. The old man was still sitting at the end of the table, quietly peeling a pear with a silver knife. "Arthur," Sarah said gently, "do you want to tell them, or should I?" Arthur Sterling set down his knife. He wiped his hands on his napkin and stood up. Though he walked with a cane now, he still commanded the room in a way James never could. He walked over to the fireplace, where a large oil painting of his own father hung. He looked at it for a moment, then turned to his wife and son. "There is no mortgage to be had, Beatrice," Arthur said heavily. "Why not?" James asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "The house is debt-free. It's the one thing we own outright." "We don't own it," Arthur said. The silence that followed was heavier than the one after Chloe's arrest. "What do you mean?" Beatrice whispered. "I live here. My name is on the mail." Arthur sighed. 3 years ago, when James made that disastrous investment in the cryptocurrency startup, the one that lost us $4 million in a week. James looked at the floor. "We were on the brink of bankruptcy," Arthur continued. "The banks were coming for everything. They were going to seize the manor. I couldn't let the Sterling name be dragged through the mud of a public foreclosure. I needed cash immediately to pay off the creditors. "So you took a loan?" Beatrice asked hopefully. "No bank would touch us," Arthur said. "So I sold the house." You sold the Sterling manor?" Beatrice looked like she was going to faint. She grabbed a chair for support. "To whom? Who are we paying rent to?" "Why didn't I know?" "I sold it to a private holding company," Arthur explained. "The Phoenix Real Estate Group. Part of the deal was a strict non-disclosure agreement and a leaseback option that allowed us to stay here for 3 years rent-free, provided we maintained the property. That 3-year term expires." Arthur checked his pocket watch. "At midnight tonight." "Phoenix Real Estate Group," James scoffed. "Who are they?" "Some faceless conglomerate. We can sue them. Squatters' rights." "It's not a conglomerate, James." Sarah's voice cut in. Sarah walked over to the sideboard and picked up her purse again. She pulled out a single, thick envelope. She pulled out a deed. A physical, stamped deed. "The Phoenix Real Estate Group is a single-member LLC," Sarah said. She turned the deed around so they could read the name of the LLC's owner. Sarah J. Sterling. James's eyes bulged. You bought the house. With what money?" Beatrice screamed. "You're a pauper. You buy your clothes at Target." "I inherited money from my grandmother," Sarah said calmly. "Not a fortune, but enough. She was a frugal woman who invested in Apple and Amazon in the 90s. When she died, she left me $2 million. $2 million? James gasped. "You told me she left you a box of old jewelry." "I lied," Sarah said, shrugging. "Because I knew if I told you the truth, you'd spend it on sports cars and business trips. So I kept it in a separate trust. And when Arthur told me 3 years ago that the house was going to be seized, I made him a designated offer. I bought the house for cash, paid off the family debt, to save your reputation, and let you live here." Beatrice was shaking her face purple. "You own my house. I have been living in your house." "Yes," Sarah said. "And every time you yelled at me for missing a spot while dusting the chandelier, you were yelling at your landlord." Sarah walked around the table, her heels clicking on the floor. "Every time you made me eat in the kitchen, you were banishing the owner of the property." She stopped in front of James. "And when you brought your mistress here, James, you brought her into my home. You disrespected me in the one place where I held all the cards." Arthur chuckled softly. "She's a smart girl, James. Smarter than you. She gave me a way to save the family name, and in exchange she secured her future. I signed the deed over gladly. I knew she was the only one who would actually take care of the place. "This is insane," James yelled. "This won't hold up in court. It's a fraud." "It's a legal sale recorded at the county clerk's office," Sarah said. "And as the owner, I have the right to determine who resides on the premises." She looked at her watch. "It is now 9:00 p.m. The lease expired technically yesterday, but I gave you a grace period for the party. That grace period is over." Sarah pulled 2 white envelopes from the table where she had placed them earlier. She handed one to Beatrice and one to James. "These are eviction notices," Sarah said. "You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. You may take your personal clothing and toiletries. The furniture, the art, and the valuables remain. They are collateral for the unpaid rent." "You can't do this," Beatrice wailed. "Where will I go? I hear the Motel 6 on the highway has vacancy." Sarah said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "It's affordable. You might have to clean your own room, though." The next morning, the sun rose over Newport, casting a brilliant orange light over the snow-covered lawn of the Sterling Manor. Sarah stood on the balcony of the master suite, the room Chloe had tried to claim, the room Beatrice had forbidden Sarah from entering. She was wearing a silk robe, drinking a cup of coffee from a mug that said, "Boss Lady." Below on the gravel driveway, a scene of pathetic desperation was unfolding. James was trying to shove a set of golf clubs into the back of a taxi. The driver was yelling at him that the trunk wouldn't close. Beatrice was standing by the gate, clutching a Louis Vuitton bag, weeping loudly into a handkerchief. They looked small, ordinary. Stripped of the mansion, the staff, and the money, they were just 2 bitter people who had never learned how to work for anything. Arthur had already left. Sarah had arranged for him to move into a comfortable, fully paid assisted living facility nearby a place with a library and no financial stress. He had left with a smile, patting Sarah's hand and whispering, "You earned it, kid." Sarah watched as James slammed the taxi trunk. He looked up at the balcony. He saw her. For a moment he looked like he might shout something. Maybe an apology, maybe a curse. But he just slumped his shoulders. The reality had finally set in. He had lost the best thing that ever happened to him because he was too busy chasing sockles. He got into the taxi. Beatrice followed, still sobbing. The car drove away, kicking up a small cloud of dust, disappearing down the long, winding driveway. Sarah took a deep breath of the crisp winter air. She turned back into the room. The house was quiet. For the first time in 5 years, it didn't feel oppressive. It didn't feel like a museum or a prison. It felt like a blank canvas. She walked downstairs to the foyer. The chandelier sparkled above her. Her phone rang. It was her lawyer, Mr. Pembroke. "Mrs. Sterling, sorry, Ms. Jenkins," the lawyer corrected himself. "The papers have been served. James signed them. The divorce will be finalized in 30 days. And the Vane family attorneys have reached out. They want to settle out of court regarding the damages to your reputation. They're offering a substantial sum to keep you from testifying." "Tell them I'll take the meeting," Sarah said, walking toward the front door. "But the price just went up." She hung up and opened the heavy oak doors. A real estate agent was standing there, a sign in her hand. "Ms. Jenkins," the agent asked, "are you ready to put the sign up?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Put it up." The agent hammered the sign into the lawn. "For sale, historic Sterling Manor." Sarah wasn't going to live here. This house held too many ghosts. She was going to sell it. With the proceeds from the house and the settlement from the Vanes, she was going to start her own firm. A forensic accounting firm dedicated to helping spouses find hidden assets in divorce cases. She walked down the steps past the for sale sign and toward her own car, a sensible, reliable sedan she had bought with her own cash. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The Sterling legacy was history. The Sarah Jenkins era had just begun. And that is how Sarah went from the maid in her own home to the owner of the estate. It's a powerful reminder. Never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes the person you are stepping on is the only one holding the floor up. What do you think? Did James and Beatrice get what they deserved? Or was Sarah too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay strong and know your worth.